I've had a few people come back. We're here with Joe DeLoss. It's interesting because, I fell into this format of really being curious about people's lives. And that's just, kind of what we do now on the podcast. But then when I bring people back, we can talk about anything, right? And in your case, lots happened, I think, since we last talked. And, you're talking about, life and
Mhm.
the beauty and the simplicity and you're referring to life on the farm, which is not, I think, where you were. The more I think about it, we were talking about this before, I don't think you had moved yet. And so why don't you just kind of hop in and start a little bit by just giving some background on yourself. People can
Mhm.
go back. We'll link to the original episode where you tell your whole life journey, but just give yourself just kind of give the audience a little context on your background before we kind of hop into where you are today and what's transpired since we last talked.
Yeah. I mean, I think the headline is I've spent most of my life trying to be, you know, a successful entrepreneur, whatever that means. I think I'm still figuring it out. But from a really young age, as an adolescent, I was finding ways to make my own money and solve problems that I saw out there. And somewhere along the line, with some good mentorship and just some alignment for me of passion, I fell into this niche of social entrepreneurship, where for me specifically, I was actively trying to tackle the problem, some of the symptoms of poverty in our community through workforce development in for-profit business settings. And I had a handful of kind of hits and misses as an entrepreneur, and then uh, it would have been in like late 2013. I was really eager to get back to becoming an employer myself, and had this idea after a trip to Nashville to fry chicken. And I Googled out a fried chicken and bought kind of an $80 Bed Bath and Beyond fryer and turned our house downtown Columbus into this fried chicken shack for a little while I tested this idea. And what it led to was what ultimately became a restaurant chain, Hot Chicken Takeover,
Hmm.
here regionally.
Hmm.
And I did that not because I was passionate about fried chicken, but I was passionate about building this community of employees and a team of folks that had experienced a decent amount of adversity in their life and were trying to change their story and their trajectory.
Yeah, and I don't remember how much we talked about this, but I'm kind of curious just to hear today the the part of you or where you think it comes from that has you wanting to make a difference in the lives of
Mhm.
other people and do that through the lens of business.
It was really, I think, the collision of two things for me, which was uh, one was just entrepreneurship, of just being passionate about building things and creating my own income streams and just not having a boss, not being
Hmm.
employed. And I think the fear of employment and my general distaste of every employment opportunity I'd had laid out that trajectory for me, which was
Hmm.
I need to be on my own.
Yeah.
And in the second part was that volunteerism was a huge part of my life.
Hmm.
I came up in a family that was pretty well resourced. Both my parents, graduated vocational school and went into. My mom was a beautician. My father was an auto mechanic, and they, well before my lifetime, evolved their careers into more professional settings with higher incomes and larger resources, and really instilled that, one, hard work, but additionally, just a generosity of spirit and compassion for people that were trying to make it on their own.
Hmm.
And so while I grew up in an environment that was super comfortable, from the beginning was like, this is kind of responsibility. We've
Hmm.
earned these resources. we're going to find ways to contribute positively to our community. And whether that was through a church or a service organization or whatever, from my grandparents to my parents and to my sister and I, that was just a big part of it for
Mhm.
us. And I had a mentor, right? I had the privilege of going to college and had a mentor my sophomore year of college in the business program that said, there's a name for this thing, this intersection, this collision that you're interested in. It's called social entrepreneurship. And I kind of crafted the rest of my undergrad experience around just preparing myself to be this thing
Mhm.
that I didn't really, there wasn't a great archetype for yet, at least in the Midwest.
Mhm.
And then I, like many entrepreneurs, I just kept trying and failing
Yeah.
until I had enough wisdom and had enough access and enough opportunity
Mhm.
to do something that resonated with customers and ultimately allowed me to become an employer in a more meaningful way to prove this idea that creating supportive, meaningful work opportunities is a way out for folks.
And, I think we talked a lot about the ups and downs and the challenges of being an entrepreneur
Mhm.
and to being the founder of Hot Chicken, and both personally and professionally, the learning and the ups and downs, the challenges, the growth that you experienced in starting and building and growing Hot Chicken. And I guess maybe that's a good segue for you to kind of pick up where we left off and explain. Maybe I don't know, how much you've really talked about where you are today
Mhm.
with with that business, and maybe share a little bit about kind of the this last piece of that journey.
As a backdrop, I kind of hit a personal bottom in around 2017, late in 2017. And so the business was growing. We were kind of hometown heroes, pretty beloved. I was getting a lot of attention as an entrepreneur, and mostly somebody that was effective at being out front and telling that story about what we were doing, why it was important, and that created a huge amount of community goodwill. It also created a huge amount of kind of narcissism and pressure for me. And when I hit bottom, it was kind of a familial bottom, a bottom with my wife and partner, a bottom in the business where we were growing faster than we could kind of muscle through it anymore, and so our culture was in a really bad spot. And I was just in a really uncomfortable place, probably the most uncomfortable place I had been in my life, unsure of how I was gonna dig my way out of this. And like many entrepreneurs, you kind of become the identity as a problem solver of the person that can fix everything, and you're celebrated for it. The community romanticizes that journey and that hardship and that sacrifice. Um, Being in that moment is so incredibly difficult.
Mhm.
And so I was there, and I kind of leaned deeply into a personal development journey to start seeing life in a more abundant way, in a less egoic way, and I mean, we can talk about that journey and those
Mhm.
tools as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
But so fast forward, through a lot of that personal development work, it became clear to me that I wanted more separation and space from this identity I had as the entrepreneur, as the boss, or the CEO or founder. And my wife and I started kicking around this idea. Once my wife and I were both back on the same team
Mhm.
and really invested in our family. Um, and so we started kicking around this adventure of like, well, let's go invest in kind of like a weekend plot of land that we can go and camp with our kids and get them out in nature, because we're living downtown in a space that doesn't have a lot of access or connection to the earth, and something that I always strived for in my life. And so we're searching, we're looking for places, and then COVID happens and everybody's hunkering down. I get thrust into navigating a restaurant's success through at least at this point, which was the most professionally challenging moment I had experienced, and our industry had probably experienced for most folks. And that all got backburnered, simultaneous to life happening virtually in such a way. And so the distance I felt like I could be comfortably from work kept growing.
Mhm.
And then what started as kind of a weekend plot of unimproved land became like, what if it was our house?
Mhm.
What if we lived in another community or lived in a more rural setting? The universe kind of conspires, and we find this beautiful piece of property in Knox County, Ohio, Mount Vernon, really near Kenyon
Mhm.
College, as
Mhm.
kind of a landmark if your listeners are local, and bought this farm, bought a home, found a home we liked that was on a beautiful piece of kind of rolling property with woods and pasture and all these things. And pretty naively just decided that was going to be our new home and I'd commute to town. And so um, that was a hell of a commitment and super exciting and created a lot of inertia for our family. And about a month after we moved, so this would have been 3 or 4 months after we kind of made this decision, we found this property. We got an inquiry to invest in Hot Chicken Takeover. And like many entrepreneurs, you get a lot of inbound. Oftentimes it's predatory or sharky, and especially in the landscape of global pandemic, you run a restaurant,
Mhm.
there was a lot of M&A happening.
Sure.
And so we ultimately invite these investors out, have them take a look at our business, and at that point it was really casual, and we thought this is a potential strategic partner to grow the brand, and we knew we needed capital. And um, very quickly after that first visit, that was not about an investment opportunity, that was actually an acquisition opportunity.
Mhm.
For me, although I always knew that that was an opportunity for Hot Chicken Takeover and an opportunity that as an entrepreneur I was interested in, it really materialized pretty quickly. And
Mhm.
so here I am, like taking care of chickens, live chickens in the morning before I
Mhm.
gun it down 62 to get home. And we start fielding this inquiry about acquiring and growing the brand. And um, as it's flattering as an entrepreneur to ever even be able to be at that table. But I think what was more critical to me is I was entering another kind of round of crisis
Mm.
personally.
Mhm.
One of which I'm feeling really comfortable in my own skin for the first time, feeling really comfortable being aware of what my limitations are as a entrepreneur, as a business person. And I started to get really I've started to feel fearful about
Mm.
my capacity as an entrepreneur, as a leader and a business person, um, and my competency about taking this brand to the next level,
Mhm.
which is we've started to figure out our prototype. We have a really dedicated work culture, and I'm really passionate about that. But at some point, it becomes a game about how great can we be about picking real estate?
Mhm.
How efficiently, quickly, affordably can we build out restaurants
Mhm.
and build a bench of team members? And um, practically, there's one of those three things that I'm interested in.
Mhm.
Just as an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
and and so not only is it flattering to have a potential partner talk about acquisition or investment, but you also it starts to become a reality of like, well, if I don't find a partner like this, what's the future look like for me, for my business, for my team,
Mhm.
and for my investors? And that whole process, I started to feel, um, I, having come from a personal place of a lot of contentment at that point, I start to feel some anxiety and fear about the opportunity cost of not doing a deal, the
Mhm.
opportunity of my team not having, growth opportunities.
Mhm.
We have all these people we deeply care about on the team, and their opportunities to grow income, wealth, to change the circumstance for their families is really dependent on us growing restaurants because
Mhm.
there's only so many salaries.
Mhm.
Um, And so I started to really think through that uh, and start to think about the implications of not
Mhm,
having a partner to grow, or what's the cost of you finance your own mistakes as an entrepreneur,
mhm,
and my mistakes were stacking up.
mm,
And if I picked another piece of bad real estate, or next thing you know, I'm in a position where the business is unstable and I
mhm,
need capital under bad circumstances. And I
mhm,
started to feel fear.
mm,
And fear isn't always the best place to make decisions from that mindset of scarcity.
mhm,
Um, but I started to feel really good about the growth opportunities for the business with additional leadership and more resources and better counsel and better experience. And so that deal shaped up. Ultimately, we did do a deal in December of 2021, and then I helped kind of steward that transition through up to now, where the business continues to grow, people continue to see more opportunities. The nature of the mission and who we hired and why we hired them is still absolutely intact and is protected. And I felt an opportunity to kind of liberate myself from the operational contribution I was making to the business to be an entrepreneur again.
mm.
And so that's kind of where
Yeah.
I'm at now.
Okay, cool. That there's a lot there that I wanna circle back around. There's a few different pieces that feel, like, we could go pretty deep on. I'm gonna just maybe pick up a little bit on kind of some of the end pieces that I heard there, um, because what I'm kinda curious about, and, I kind of can relate to this in my own journey as an entrepreneur, is, what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of learning going on, right? There's a lot of growth and awareness that's happening. And it's interesting to me how much we can learn about ourselves, about how we are being in the world, in our relationships, in our marriages, with our children, with our
Mhm.
family and friends, with our teams, um, through the experience of being in business. Now, I'm pretty convinced you can get all that learning no matter where you are and what you're doing. But in our case, we've chosen business and entrepreneurship as the great teacher, right? One of them at least. Yeah, I'm just kind of struck by how much you got to learn about yourself, even though it might have been really hard at times. And I remember this, from our first podcast, where I really appreciate, and this was another thing I was just thinking about while you were talking that we can talk more about. I really appreciate your honesty and your self awareness and your willingness to own that and talk about it. When you use words like narcissism, and you talk about, kind of, being the hero and the identity, and all the things that come with that. You talk about your relationship. These are things most people are not talking about. Certainly not people that are in the spotlight, or that are considered to be, like you said, it's romanticized. That is a real thing. The whole thing gets kind of spun in a way
Yeah.
that is a great narrative, and it's not. I don't think with any bad intent. And it's not that there's not a lot of great things happening there. It's just that people are only seeing a piece of it, and I really appreciate you sharing kind of the fullness of that experience for you, because I hope other people are seeing that they're not alone. Oftentimes, you might be aware of some faults, some weaknesses, some, insecurities, your ego, but you sure as hell don't want people to know that, right?
Mhm.
So, I guess, just to come back around to, a question, I'm kind of curious just to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on the fact that you got to learn all of that in that kind of modality, and maybe why you believe capitalism or entrepreneurship social enterprise is a great tool for learning.
It's a huge gift to just be able to get to go on this journey to begin with. Doesn't always feel like a gift. Sometimes it felt like a burden. Uh, but to your point, you can get pegged as the hero. You're on this hero's journey. You're sacrificing. It's hard for you. It's all these sleepless nights, all of these things. But no part of that romance talks about all the collateral damage you're leaving in your wake
Mhm.
of sure, those sleepless nights where I had to show up to a restaurant or deal with a personnel issue or whatever that might be, or a global pandemic, that I wasn't present for myself. I wasn't present for my kids. I wasn't present for my partner, you know? And that's not the romantic story.
Mhm.
That's not kind of the this prototypical rom-com
Right.
story about the little setback that leads to this beautiful opportunity, and we just know it's not that clean.
Yeah.
But that's not a popular narrative to tell.
Right.
And so, for me, I think I'm forever grateful for the journey I got to go on and that I'm still on as an entrepreneur. And I'm really thankful for all the people that were nameless through that journey, through all of that romance and all of that storytelling, who I did harm to.
Mm.
I did harm not with bad intent
Mhm.
necessarily, but because they crossed paths with me as part of my journey,
Oh, yeah.
where I was naive,
Sure.
ignorant,
Yeah, scared.
scared,
Yeah,
high on myself,
sure.
drunk,
Yeah,
whatever it
right.
might be. And that's it's a pretty long list, unfortunately.
Well,
And
and, I don't really believe it's as long as you might feel like it is, but
yeah,
I don't wanna take that away from you. I don't know, but I do think sometimes when you are as, you know, considerate and caring authentically. I mean, you don't start the business that you started
yeah.
because you don't really deeply care about people, that you might be a little bit harder on yourself than the reality. But it's probably better to err that way, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I fast forward to where I'm at now, my orientation, my mindset. I think there was always kind of an intuitive truth of unconditional love and compassion. It was how I was raised,
Hmm.
how I was expected to show up in the world,
Mm,
um, and it was something that I was not tapped into.
hmm.
But like it always does, the truth sets you free, and the truth always comes out.
Hmm.
And so I'm grateful that those seeds were planted,
Hmm.
in me,
Hmm.
through nature and through nurture,
Hmm.
and that now that intuitive truth is my lived truth,
Hmm.
and the identity that I call home now.
Hmm.
And and I wouldn't have got there without the wisdom of the experience I had, without the people that I encountered and that I was in relationship to,
Hmm.
um, along the way.
Yeah, I want to just ask you one more thing about this, and then talk about the aside from business, what else you did use to be able to experience the the learning and the growth that has you landing in this place that you call home. And I when you say nature and nurture, I'm of the belief that that's like a return to why you were here to
Mhm,
begin with, right? You were lucky enough to have this unconditionally loving and really wonderful role modeling. But I personally believe we're born into this world with that
mhm.
essence, and we forget it, lose sight of it. And I want to come back and talk about how you've navigated that. But one more piece on this, on the business part. You know, um, I've been talking a lot about this book that I'm really enjoying right now called The Courage to Be Disliked. And it really talks about kind of staying, in your lane, a separation of tasks is what they call it, where it's like, you can't really control how people are going to feel about you or if they're going to like you, and that's not your job. And it's a fine line between becoming narcissistic and also trying to care for people and sincerely want to help others, right? And that can bleed into people pleasing, and in fact, that's actually a selfish act, right? You just want people to like you. It's really about you. And so what I'm wondering is, in the world of business, there's a certain amount of, sure, I mean, if you're drunk and you're screaming and yelling at people, or you're, abusive, or um, you know, just not treating people kindly, professionally, respectfully, that's not good behavior, right? That's probably, nothing that any of us should emulate. Um, but there are a lot of tough decisions that have to be made, that might be very unpopular, that people might be mad about, that people might,
Mhm.
that people might misconstrue. You might not mean that, but they might hear it the way that they're bringing their stuff to it. That's sort of what this book is about. Is like, everybody's bringing their stuff to it. You might never know what that is. You got to kind of stay within yourself. And so, I guess I'm just curious what your thoughts are about how if it's even possible to kind of thread that needle in the world of business, where there are so many people and personalities and conditioning that's coming into this, like, messy soup of a culture, right? It seems, for me, it's difficult at times to actually try to lead, stand, make tough decisions, do it with a loving, beautiful intention, and um, still, have, I guess, people be happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not leading a team now at this moment.
Mhm.
I'm trying to lead myself with as much awareness as I can, and awareness of my own impulsivity and all of the other things that have in some ways contributed to my success, and sometimes not, uh, through the last few years. But in kind of the most modern iteration of the hot chicken takeover culture that was under my leadership, that I was connected to, I started to recognize just how much sheer will, strength, force, hours, et cetera, it took to 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 try to lead a culture that was open, transparent, full of grace, full of compassion. Um, and I really saw that exercise as my primary responsibility as the leader of the business, which was, how do you truly just create space for everybody to have a human experience at work, in a considerate enough way that aligns all these business outcomes and everything else you need to do day to day in the form to be successful. And that takes a huge amount of work and a huge amount of conversation and openness and meeting people where they're at. And it also blurs some lines of, hey, I had this expectation for you, Brett. You didn't meet it. You got to go. And I think as I laid kind of myself into that culture and that experience of setting clear expectations, of offering people grace and compassion when it was needed, I ultimately got to a place where almost detaching from the outcome of decisions, or from the hardship of maybe separating somebody that wasn't aligned with the mission anymore. But because I was so confident in what we were building culturally, it made acceptance of those outcomes a little easier for me.
Mhm.
And so, because I knew that that leadership wasn't coming from my old sense of ego and self that was so revered and so celebrated, that I had to be in a position where I felt like I was operating out of a sense of truth, of true intent and acceptance of the moment. And often when had to lead to a conclusion of a tough decision, of a decision that I knew somebody would dislike,
Mhm.
I was doing it without that consequence personally
Mhm.
of shouldering that burden,
Taking it
because
on, yeah.
shouldering that burden is
Yeah.
just another name for ego, right?
Sure,
Of
sure.
like, "Ah, I gotta step up again.
Right.
You guys need me.
I.
I."
Right, yeah.
And,
Yeah.
really just not much good comes out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, that's kind of, the journey I've been on. I was just curious to hear your take because, what I've landed in, is just, being who I am and all, areas of my life, as much as I remember to do that, right, and embody that, and then, just being at peace,
Mhm,
with what is, and, in life, and I'm pretty convinced
mhm.
it's, in life, it's not just in business, um, that, you have to find that place, because the stuff is always going to be there,
Yeah.
no matter, what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think tactically, if I think about the business competency or leadership competency that I had to lean the most into to feel comfortable with those decisions is that, the objective was all that to just desperately
Mm.
seek to understand intent, seek to understand past experience or the suffering somebody might be going
Mhm,
through.
mhm,
And also try to create a culture where those folks would seek to understand your perspective.
mhm,
And,
mhm.
because, when you do understand or you've sought to understand thoughtfully, it's a little bit more comfortable to let people off the hook
Sure.
or to accept yourself or to accept the outcome.
Mhm,
And, yeah, it was a really critical piece of the puzzle, but
mhm,
too many leaders, I think, um, it can fall into that authoritative trap of like, "Well, I guess at the end of the day, I am the boss.
mhm.
I am the owner, or I am the
Sure.
founder. I can
Right,
make this call."
right. Well, so, let me, back up with you because there's a tremendous sense of awareness. There's a lot of learning. You have, now been round trip with a business, and I think people can sit here and hear the fullness of that journey, but maybe, mostly hear the success of it. And I want to go back and have you unpack a little bit how you navigated the the bottoms, and I'm not talking about in the business. I'm talking about when you described, some personal bottoms and within the business, but just kind of generally, seeing things, unfold poorly or not in the way that, you wanted to or felt good about. I wanna have you unpack a little bit what you did. How much of it was just, shown to you through your own actions and those around you, and how much of it was discovered, whether that be in therapy or
Mhm.
in, ceremony or other modalities. Maybe you could, share with us a little bit about the journey of seeing, learning, integrating, growing to be at a place that you are today where you can talk about it the way you are.
Finding a bottom sure as hell helps,
Mhm.
of having kind of a critical having a critical inflection point that you think to yourself, "Man, the truth is fully out. I don't think it's hard to imagine a situation worse than the situation I'm in. I'm in a terrible amount of pain and discomfort. I'm creating a terrible amount of pain and discomfort, and it I can't. It's not sustainable. There's no place to go from here. And so I'm grateful I'm grateful to have found that. I'm grateful to have found that moment,
Mhm.
and really grateful for a couple people in my life that, my wife in particular, that were really a catalyst for that.
Mhm.
Of crying out to say, we can't do this anymore.
Mhm.
And so from a personal bottom, for me. And I might have more bottoms to come. I'm not sure what wisdom I haven't learned yet.
Mhm.
Um, but so immediately the modalities I leaned into were therapy and meditation.
Mhm.
And an investor of ours, a mentor, a mutual friend of ours, had me tag along to a retreat that essentially a mindfulness retreat. And I had been having multiple people in my life that I trusted and cared about say, Joe, you got to lean into this. Like this discomfort you're feeling, all this projection you're doing, all of this entitlement you're feeling, you're gonna have to understand. And meditation might be one of those tools. And I just why would I need to meditate? I had all the answers, right?
Mhm.
And so I had just the moment, literally a long weekend to lean into this practice as another kind of learning tool for me. And I was desperate enough to feel like I had something to learn finally
Mhm.
because I was miserable. And very quickly through that modality in particular, through silence, through sitting with myself, through taking kind of radical ownership and acceptance of what I was experiencing or thinking or hearing, my heart and my life started opening up. Of of like many others would suggest, you start to encounter life with a curiosity as the observer, versus being identified with that character you've played for so long.
Mhm.
And I think about just being kind of uh, an '80s baby, and coming to kind of into adolescence through the era of the Matrix, and I saw the Matrix, right?
Mhm.
Like I started to see my code and how I was what kind of feelings and thoughts comprised my existence.
Mhm.
And so that modality in particular was critically important. I had the privilege of having a coach
Mhm.
and found myself in a group of men that were all entrepreneurs, that were all facing similar things in life, that
Mhm.
were benefiting through that work.
Mhm.
And like most narcissists, it was just a tool for me to advance.
Mhm.
And it wasn't, that modality in particular, it took me a couple years before I had a deep spiritual connection and truth with what I was learning through that,
Mhm.
that this was more of a divine intervention and less about this thing that I'm good at doing because I can sit on a cushion for 15 minutes every morning.
Mhm.
And so that journey, continues today and is more of a spiritual journey and spiritual practice than it was a practical tool.
Mhm.
But I'm grateful that it starts with an app or some practical application that I could connect
Mhm.
with.
Let me just
Yeah.
jump in there for a second because I like what you said about divine intervention, and I'm curious about uh, hearing you talk a little bit more about that. Before we got started, you talked a little bit about how you moved to the farm before, and you mentioned it just a little bit ago before the inquiry came in, right? And
Hmm.
there's a lot of what feels like divine intervention or perfection, the
Hmm.
universe just being at work when these things show up. And I think a lot of times people will think that language like divine intervention or divine at all, is so big. It's maybe falls into this woo woo world, or it gets misunderstood. And my what I'm hearing you say in my experience is that it's often a lot more simple than that. It's sort of just in the air, right? And it's the noticing of that can become massively transformative, right? So meditation, something that you can, do on an app today that, a lot of people are dabbling in and a wide range of ways and depth. But it's not about the simple tool, right? It's about that there was something in you that was ready to receive that tool. And and it might have even been, a seed that was planted a long time ago with the friend that, decided to include you, and whatever seed was inside of that person that had, born the idea of doing these retreats, it's all seems to be so, like, intricately woven together, um, and I think that gets lost, that if you're not open to that, if you're not, in that flow, you might just dismiss it as like, oh, it's meditation. I'm not into
Mhm.
that, And so I don't know, maybe you could just expand a little bit on, the way that these things, not just that retreat and that tool, but how people and other things that have really served you in your growth have shown up for you in that kind of,
Mhm.
divine way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you look at something like meditation, and for many, kind of the gateway into meditation is, here's a modality that you can learn, that you can control, that you can own, that will allow you to improve your life. It's this very prescriptive application of this competency that you can learn. Again, all with this identity of me as the controller, me as the coder and the programmer that is going to find this hack to improve my life. I mean, it started there for me. I know it starts for many, but versus being just a tool that you can master, it becomes how do I find myself in dialogue with my higher truth, with my higher self, and to have that evolution in my own spiritual practice, my own meditation practice, to feel with more divinity, with kind of a divine interaction of I am in this flow of life, and I'm gonna train, this form so that I can observe, that I can be along for the ride versus in control of it. And, I had other interventions that I think helped really solidify that practice for me. But when you lose the sense of I, that I manifested this destiny, that I manifested these opportunities, that I pulled myself up by my bootstraps or whatever this, kind of nonsense identity you can fall into. And you just get to say, wow, I am observing, I am a character in my own movie, and I'm just getting to observe this beautiful narrative play out. And so when you get one of those inklings of, the way my wife and I felt when we kind of came over this driveway to this home, and at that point we were so discouraged with our search for a property
Mm,
that we weren't even going to go on this site visit on
mm,
this, and our realtor said, "Hey, you know, you've got about a 48-hour window. We'd love for you to come up and see it. I think it'll fit for your family." And sure enough, we crest this little gravel drive and we see the home, we see the property. And before we even stepped out of the car, my wife thought, yeah, this is
mhm,
like shit. I guess this is the one.
mhm,
And it felt like one of those moments
mhm,
that we could have, for so many reasons, taken responsibility and ownership of that outcome in our life.
mhm,
But we just got to be passengers on the ride that got to observe how this thing unfolded for us,
mhm,
which I appreciate that we did work in our life that led to that moment as well.
mhm,
Um, but it really felt like we were just in the flow of life, that was truly an aligned opportunity for
mhm,
us, and
mhm,
just as much as the opportunity to grow Hot Chicken through a strategic partner was, and all
mhm,
of those things that have
mhm.
unfolded.
Yeah, it's really like the beautiful, messy, perfect mosaic of
Yeah.
your life that, continues to reveal itself and, in a sometimes really challenging but ultimately beautiful way. I'm just curious to hear you say, I want to talk to you about the farm and kind of where we started, with your experience there. And also, I want to hear you talk a little bit about the sequence.
Mhm.
We were starting to talk about that, the sequence of you moving there, and then I think there's something pretty important there. But, is there anything else you wanna share? I know that you
Yeah.
are involved in a lot of ways to navigate this journey, and you've talked about therapy and meditation. I know you've done some of the big gun plant medicines, and anything else that maybe you want to share that's really been important in
Mhm.
this time in your life.
Well, the other kind of initial modality was therapy, marriage therapy, personal therapy. I think at one point we shared a therapist as well.
Yeah.
And that just as a practical kind of tool, one that I appreciate is a huge privilege to be able to afford those kind of interventions, right?
Yes.
And so that was a critical piece of my puzzle as well, which gave my wife and I different tools to be partners effectively together, which gave me additional tools beyond meditation to challenge and get yelled at
Mm,
times,
mhm,
and those
mhm,
things that were critically important when your ego is so strong that you are so unaware of what all of the signs of life are telling you, you
mhm,
know and so that was a long journey too, and that
mhm,
was a few years alongside of meditation practice, and
mhm,
and there was a moment, I think probably 2 years in from that bottom, so this would have been early 2019 for me, where I started to trust myself again. I started to trust my instincts, and I started to feel a sense of kind of peace and understanding and contentment in my
mm,
life that now became the basis to make decisions
mhm,
of this just tap into calm, even when things weren't calm around me. Fast forward like 6 months from then, and the world shuts down and things get weird, and you
mhm,
just, but I was doing that from a space of peace and acceptance and at the end of the day, a knowingness that everything will be, not everything will be okay, but just everything will be.
mhm.
And I get the gift of being along for the ride and learning what I need to learn. And I mean, that radically changed my experience. And I believe the experience of our business
Mhm,
through a global pandemic to be in a position afterwards to not have an acquisition out of a liquidation or a fire sale, but out of the strength of our brand,
mhm,
was a really a testament to what our team accomplished through that.
mhm,
And I know my leadership was a part of that. And so, alongside of those 2 modalities and a lot of just personal familial work and presence that it took, I did lean into plant medicine opportunities and others to just deepen that practice. And I know this is something we've talked a lot about
mm,
offline and our own experiences. And what I am afraid of is the novelty and the enthusiasm around plant medicine, whether it's psilocybin or ayahuasca or iboga or name it.
mhm.
There are a lot of people that haven't started that personal development journey or inflection point that just want to jump to this shortcut. Super American of us, this
Mhm,
shortcut that's just easy,
mm,
and it's not easy. It's not
mhm,
safe, and,
mm.
there's a lot of difficulty around it, and so I'm sensitive even how I share about it because I don't
Yeah.
wanna encourage people to do it without doing a lot of the work.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
share that, concern, and
Mhm.
again, I think it's, part of the reason why I brought it up and part of the reason why I think it's important to talk about. Because in the same way that, people will romanticize, the other parts of that journey, they will do the same thing with any modality, but with plant medicines, you're talking about ones that, like you said, can be quite dangerous if not, properly, carefully, gently worked with, and more importantly, integrated.
Mhm.
I love the fact that you started with talking about your meditation and then went to your therapy, because I believe if you don't have those daily practices, those fundamental basics to integrate anything, whatever your deep dive, ecstatic experiences of choice, it's just going to be a short term high at best, right? And at worst, it could really fuck you up,
Yeah.
and so Yeah, I mean, like you, also have been incredible teachers, and I have such gratitude for those medicines. It has been so beneficial for me, but got to be super careful, and got to do the work every day. Maybe
Mhm.
more importantly.
I've been in ceremony with people that were looking for the shortcut,
Mhm.
and it's one, hard to watch,
Mhm.
and it's also really in the absence of readiness and preparedness. It also can be a really terrible, scary unlock for folks
Yeah.
where sometimes you're not prepared to see what you're going to see.
Yeah.
And you think a lot about the types of traumas people experience in life that lead to, you know, personality disorders, self harm, all of these things. For many of us, our ego is the self preservation mechanism that keeps us safe from those really harmful memories. And I'm
Mhm.
grateful to have had an existence in the world that hasn't left so many traumatic imprints on me that I
Mhm.
couldn't recover from. And so I think what people forget is that your body preserved you from those things. Your wisdom, nature preserved you from some of those memories. And so you really have to be prepared and have the effective tools and integration and facilitation so that when you confront something that your body has ignored
Mhm.
or preserved you from for years,
Mhm.
you got to be ready with the resource in the toolbox to handle it.
Yeah.
And I have witnessed people that haven't had that readiness and opted for the shortcut,
Mhm.
and you get to experience the pain and the trauma in a real way then, and that can be difficult, if not catastrophic. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I definitely, even though I'm open about that journey and how plant medicine has been one of those tools I've used,
Mhm.
I'm really grateful that that tool came into my life after I had done a lot of the heavy work
Mhm.
in frankly, a sober way.
Mhm. Mhm.
you know
Mhm.
um
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Also feels like, divine, perfection and all of that, right? That it kinda
Mhm.
came to you in that order. And, let's talk about then, another, maybe the most, I don't know, it's not probably fair to try to rank them, but, the modality that seems to really be really shifting your life in all kinds of ways now is nature, and being on this farm, and having that life. um and so I'm curious about kind of what else you're shifting into and up to. We'll talk about that, but talk about the decision to move. You talked a little bit about the pandemic and its influence, and but you take a jump that not many people are willing to take, especially with young kids, where you got to think about schools and all the stuff, right? You guys take this jump, and it sounds like not only did then there be some space that got created, physically and energetically, to allow for something like this offer to come in, right? And then this offer comes in, and that creates now a whole massive expansion of space for you to really be in the world in a different way, and it just feels all super connected. And I'd like to just hear your experience of that shift, from literally to the farm.
Like everything in nature, there's just seasons, I think, to our lives. And the season I was in of building and growing the business, every opportunity I got, I expressed a tremendous amount of energy to try to get our family outside or get myself outside, whether it was on a mountain bike or a backpacking trip or a trail run or, whatever it was. And when you're living in the city, and in central Ohio in particular, that was finding to get yourself into kind of unbridled nature with privacy and space out in nature was a 30 to 60-minute exercise each direction. And I found myself just spending a lot of energy trying to tap in to nature and the intuition that I think you can gather from nature. And so I think for me, the season switched where I thought, what if we, what if we express that energy when we want to be back dialed in into the urban environment and the density and the city and um, versus the kind of privacy and openness that otherwise came. And so I think my wife Lisa and I just got tired of having to work so hard for it. She's inherently an introvert and generally fills her cup by herself. Living the life we were living in Columbus, that was also always at odds.
Mhm.
And so she probably less so inspired by nature, but more so inspired by the space and the personal opportunity, was equally compelled by it. And as a couple, thankfully, those patterns aligned.
Mhm.
And so when we made the jump, I don't think we realized kind of the abundance that that space would create for us
Mm.
of, for me coming through a huge professional transition where I was, ultimately the primary decision maker whose every decision, rested on my shoulders one way or another to, and to solving these complex, like multi-year problems that we were looking at of, signing a 10-year lease somewhere, these
Mm.
long time horizons to get to shift to a work output at times of, oh, we had a couple trees go down in that storm and they're
Mhm.
blocking our trail or
Mhm.
they're blocking our driveway, whatever it might be. So I'm going to wake up this morning and I'm going to solve that problem. And at
Mhm.
the end of this day or the end of this 2 hour project or 4 hour project or 15-hour project, um, I'll be on to the next problem.
Mhm.
And so there's something really rewarding to me, I think, of allowing the earth and nature to dictate some of your workflow
Mhm.
and to have that kind of shot of adrenaline or acknowledgement, of I observed a problem and I solved a problem
Mhm.
all all before I ate lunch.
Mhm.
And so I think for me professionally, being in that season was really rewarding in a
Mm.
way that I didn't anticipate.
Mhm.
And and out of it, a lot of other ideas are being born that
Mhm.
um, is really, really fulfilling.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
that because I what I'm curious about is I'm hearing the beauty and the simplicity of problem solving on the farm and in nature, and I could see how that could be really simply fulfilling. It might have its own version of, complexity, but like in reality, it's sort of one with the earth and, solving those kinds of problems, which, feel like an entirely different flavor of problem solving. And I could see how, and you see that, people just choose to do that for life.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's a compelling argument for that. But I get the sense that's not what you are going to be doing for life, or at least not the only thing that you're going to be doing. And so I'm kind of curious to have you expand a little bit on where you are with wanting to continue to be in business,
Mhm.
and how you might do that, with the benefit of the experience that you've had, and why.
So one, I'm unsure what path I'm on, you know? I think I I I recognize the opportunity I've been given, some of the abundance I'm experiencing in nature and life as a family, and I get to be along for the ride for a little bit, I um, have given myself a little runway to just explore and experience life and see what bubbles up. And, um, I absolutely will be back in business. I'm already back in business in a lot of ways, and a lot of it for me comes from, I miss being in a community of people and on a team,
Mhm.
and so I'm thankful to have access to a lot of great people and a lot of entrepreneurs that have presented me with opportunities and have presented things for me to consider to be involved with. And so, like very cautiously, I'm kind of dipping my toes in the water and and thankfully have found myself to be a really engaged advisor and partner, to other operators that are out in the business world, where I can share some of the wisdom I've gained, some of the lessons I've been kind of lucky enough to learn, and get to tackle some new problems with other people. And what I have found, and I think you've experienced this in business as well, especially in the early days, sometimes it's just really helpful to have a kind of another grown up in the room.
Mhm.
Most entrepreneurs surround themselves with just crazy passionate people that are just willing to grind and willing to
Mhm.
buy into that romance story. And every once in a while, you'll cross paths with a mentor, an investor, or a friend that shares some wisdom with you or helps you through a decision that just creates a lot of relief
Mhm.
and a lot of peace of mind. And so I'm eager to step into that role when it's
Mhm.
applicable.
Mhm.
And so I've got a couple small businesses that I'm supporting, and really enjoying that. Really enjoying supporting other people that are driving and operating versus being in that seat.
Mhm.
And slowly but surely, I think as my cup continues to fill, I am excited to be an operator again,
Mm.
and just as much as I thought it wouldn't be a huge part of my life, or I was going to take a longer break from it. As one of our former investors said, if you've got ketchup in your veins, you got ketchup in your veins. You're going to be
Mhm.
in hospitality, and
Mhm.
I keep finding myself coming back to hospitality
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I brought you a whole bunch of donuts today
Oh,
that
yeah.
that I fried
Wow.
this morning.
There's a business there. If you wanna make that a business, you've got a product that would sell. I'll probably keep you in business, by myself. Those were tasty. What I am relating to is that, there's a certain, real pleasure in being in relationship with people that share a passion or an interest or a goal. And I have found just how important that is, especially just in navigating work and life. It's why I've really appreciated you as a friend, and others that you can really talk about anything with, and can speak a common language. I get your battle wounds, your
Mhm.
entrepreneurial traumas, and your struggles with ego and validation and praise and identity, and all of it, right? And there's something really nice about being in relationship, having that shared experience. And, I think that's part of what you get by, being in that world in any capacity, as an advisor, as an investor, as an operator. It's all there. I think it's great. Like, I like the ketchup in your veins thing. I think, outside of hospitality, if you've got the energy, the juice to kind of keep doing it, you gotta use it, because it's gonna nag at you, it's gonna bother you, and it doesn't mean that you have to be an entrepreneur to the day you die. It just means that, like, you still got some left,
Mhm.
embrace it, use it, enjoy it, and I'm sure that that's what you're gonna do, what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think the expression of entrepreneurship as problem solving, when I think, especially as a father, when I think about the volatility that I feel in the world right now, or in the community, or the experience we're all collectively having, as a dad, if I think about what do I want to impart in my children, or what do I want to nurture that's already there, is probably more the case.
Mhm.
It's that I have two young daughters, and I want them to grow up with a sense of agency and sovereignty in contributing to improving the world and the community in positive ways through problem solving. And I think entrepreneurship is this one kind of generalist pursuit that allows you, that level of contribution. And so, we're living out on a farm and homeschooling our kids, and my contribution to about the 10% of their education that my wife isn't like innovating and leading is around entrepreneurship. And
Mhm.
so I've got a 7 and 9-year-old that have their own little micro businesses, and I get to be in relationship to them as they
Mhm.
find ways to make their own money and solve a problem,
Mm.
you know?
Mm.
And so, I think increasingly as a family, we're getting really passionate about how do we hold space for other families to learn some of those lessons
Mm.
and express themselves in those ways. And so I don't know how that manifests, but when I think about, tying back to all of those modalities of learning
Mhm.
um, that I had to go through from a personal development perspective, what we hope is that, we can find a way now to lean on that level of observation and awareness to just see how this might manifest itself.
Mhm.
We have property and space.
Mhm.
We have a lot of passion and enthusiasm, a little bit more time than we used to.
Mhm.
And so I'm on for that ride too, to
Yeah.
maybe see what the
Sure.
yield is of,
Mhm.
ways that we can do that.
Mhm.
And I love entrepreneurs, and, I have a lot of entrepreneurs coming up to the farm to cut wood and
Mhm.
dig ditches and, learn together, and
Yeah.
that's really refreshing too.
Well, one thing I was just thinking, I have a friend who started this company called Gravy Stack, which is, I think, I don't know if it's actually launched. They were in beta, and I think they
Okay.
might be out there now. But it's an app that gamifies financial literacy for children, and it
Oh, cool.
teaches kids how to save money, invest money, and it's all done through games. Like they have their most popular game is something to do with canceling subscriptions. And they're like getting the average family to save $400 a month because like the goblin comes and gets you if your subscription's not
Oh,
active and you're
that's
not using.
awesome.
Anyway, so you might check that
Gravy
out.
stack.
Gravy Stack, yeah. Scott Donald, he was on the podcast too, and a couple of my strategic coach friends. So think about that for
Okay.
homeschooling. It could be super
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, just share any final thoughts. It's been great to have you back on, and I really am again appreciative of your sharing and really talking about the journey and the parts that maybe people don't know and don't get to see, and that I know many people are experiencing. I think it's of great value. I think that if you never did anything entrepreneurial again, just sharing your experience is super impactful, and you could make a life out of just doing that, and supporting other people. And I know you're doing both, so I thank you for that. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for being a good friend. But I'll turn the mic over to you for any final thoughts.
I mean, I think back where we started, there's so much romance and, um, enthusiasm that's put around the sacrifice of leadership, the sacrifice of entrepreneurship. And it's so easy to opt into that. It's so easy to believe and kinda get drunk off your own Kool-Aid, you know?
Hmm.
And and so if I could encourage anybody, if anything, to learn from a little bit of this conversation, it's just about, building the tools, whatever that might be, to just listen a little bit more.
Mm.
And I think to get yourself outside of your business and that vertical you're in, because everybody there is also your name's on their paycheck. And so it's really important to just create the space so that you can listen and observe and open yourself up to where life might take you a little bit more. And I'm thankful that I've had a lot of those teachers along the way, and that I've fostered a little bit of an ability that I'm still trying to grow to listen. Just be the water, not the waves of
Mm.
life. And all too often we identify with those ups and downs and get celebrated in the news because of it, one way
Mhm.
or another. Maybe
Mhm.
not always celebrated.
Mm.
Um, and
Mhm.
so yeah, just encourage people to be the water, not the waves, and start building some tools so that they can listen and observe, and it's a hell of a lot nicer, and
Mm.
it's a lot more pleasant to be in this space than the alternative.
I like that. Be the water, not the wave. All right, Joe. Thank you. Thanks
Thank you
again. I
so
really
much, Brett.
appreciate it.